I'm George Smart from the U.S. Modernist Radio Breaking News Desk, which I'm sitting at right now. In Palm Springs, one of the largest concentrations of modernist houses in the world, a downtown hotel association wants to buy a huge statue of Marilyn Monroe for $1 million to increase tourism post-pandemic. The statue is a fun but somewhat cheesy 26-foot-tall depiction of the famous scene where Marilyn's dress blows up over a grate. She was going to go right downtown where all the tourists could gawk and take photos, but there's a problem. Last fall, the city council suddenly voted to close the street and place the statue right in front of the world-class Palm Springs Art Museum, creating widespread resistance and a legal challenge. Let's go now to past podcast guest and international designer and Palm Springs resident Hailey Tuck, who with noted preservationist Chris Minrad has raised over $56,000 on GoFundMe because, hey, these legal fights ain't cheap. Hi, Trina.
Hi, George.
Tell me about this statue of Marilyn Monroe.
Well, Marilyn is 26 feet tall, and she weighs 34,300 pounds. And she is a sculpture that is basically a rendering of the scene in The 7-Year Itch, where Marilyn Monroe is standing over a subway grate and her skirt of her white dress is blowing up.
The famous photo, right, yeah.
Yeah, a famous photo has been interpreted into a giant statue. And just to get kind of the idea of how large she is, if you're standing next to her, you might go up to, I would say, slightly above her ankle or her calf.
Oh, okay.
Because she's so huge that, she's wearing a small heel. So if you stand next to her, you are dwarfed by her. She is humongous.
And she's been around, about 10 years, roughly?
Well, she was in Palm Springs from 2012 to 2014. I believe she was made in the 90s. And she's been in Chicago, and I think she's been in New Jersey. And I guess the difference between when she was in Chicago, for example, is that in Chicago, she was surrounded by skyscrapers. So her scale wasn't quite as, I guess I would say, jarring as it is in Palm Springs, where really the tallest building is maybe, 8 or 9 stories tall.
Sure. Now, people really love the Marilyn statue as a tourist attraction, and it was a big hit when it came to Palm Springs before. And what caused it to come back?
Well, there's a hotel organization called PS Resorts, and the president or CEO, his name is Aftab Dada, loves Marilyn and really believes in Marilyn almost as a antidote to what has happened with the pandemic. Business has been down naturally because travel has been down across the country.
Sure.
But anyway, he loves her and he views her as something to sort of solve all Palm Springs problems and bring flocks of people to Palm Springs.
Which is not a bad idea in theory, right? Because there has been a pandemic and tourism is down. And,
yes.
And there was a plan to have all this roll out. What was the plan?
Well, the plan was that there's some redevelopment going on in downtown Palm Springs. And in 2016, there was a plan done for the area that's being redeveloped be called the Downtown Palm Springs Specific Plan. And in that plan, there's a park designed, and Marilyn was to have a place in the park. This is something that was worked on for many, many years with various community groups, architects, all the interested parties. It was sort of hashed out over several years. And in 2016, this plan was finalized with Marilyn placed in the park. And, she is a big, tourists do like Marilyn. They like to get her picture taken with Marilyn. So anyhow, this was kind of like the plan. And then in November, the plan was changed.
November last year.
Yes, November 2020. Basically, out of nowhere, the Palm Springs City Council and PS Resorts announced that they were closing a street called Museum Way. And in the plan from 2016, Museum Way was a new street that was designed to connect the Palm Springs Art Museum to the main drag of Palm Springs, which is called Palm Canyon Drive. It's a really beautiful mid-century building, and the Museum Way was to provide a sight line from Palm Canyon Drive to the museum, and then the mountains are behind. So it's sort of a really beautiful view from Palm Canyon.
Absolutely, sure.
So the new plan that the City Council and PS Resorts came up with in November was to place the giant Maryland statue right in the middle of Museum Way, which is the new street that the taxpayers paid for, blocking the front of the museum. So this is controversial, and the organization that I'm representing, called CREMA, the Committee to Relocate Maryland, is basically trying to convince the city council to move her back to her location in the park or to find another location, but not to block the front of this iconic museum that's actually on the National Register of Historic Places.
So if you're listening to this and thinking, well, Palm Springs is big, it's a desert, what's the problem with putting a 26-foot tall Maryland in front of a museum? What would people see when they exit the museum?
Well, what they would see is Marilyn's skirt blowing up, and they basically would get, a butt shot and her giant granny panties. And if you'd like to see a rendering of that, you can visit our GoFundMe page, where we have a rendering of what that would look like. I mean, it's photoshopped, but
Right.
You get the idea.
Right. And that's not really appropriate for a world-class art museum.
No, it's not. And it's really not appropriate for a world-class art museum, or really for, a city that has kind of like made its name on mid-century architecture to place this thing in front of such an important building.
Yeah. So if they would just put it back where they were supposed to put it, everything would be hunky-dory.
Everything would be hunky-dory as far as we're concerned. Yes.
Okay. So your CREMA group has raised an amazing amount of money.
Yes.
What is your strategy with the council now? How are you going to approach getting them to make this right?
Well, we have an attorney who's actually been working with us since January, and she's written a couple of letters, and the responses we've gotten from the city have not been satisfactory. So I am not able to discuss exactly what the next thing is.
Okay.
But
or you'd have to kill me. Yes, I know. Okay.
The whole purpose of the GoFundMe is to finance any legal action that might be necessary. And we do anticipate that some will be necessary, because just sort of general commentary from the citizens of Palm Springs has been ignored by the city council. And they've also, frankly, contradicted this 2016 downtown plan that was, as I said, sort of worked out over many years with many entities involved. So the idea that our city council is kind of just pretending like that never happened is quite disturbing, and kind of begs the question, why are they doing the bidding of PS Resorts and letting them co-opt this new taxpayer-funded street? It's a bit of a mystery. We don't know why they're doing it, but it doesn't seem quite right.
Now, how can people contribute to this, Trina?
Well, they can go to GoFundMe, and the fundraiser is under CREMA, which is CREMA, the Committee to Relocate Maryland, or they can just search my name, Trina Turk, and it will pop up that way as well.
Okay.
And you can see the pictures. You can read the whole blurb that we have about what our organization is trying to do. And we also have on the GoFundMe page a few letters that have gone back and forth from the city council to our attorney. And we also posted the city council meeting where they abruptly announced this decision that they were going to move the placement of Maryland, which was just really strange. And I don't know if well, anyway, you can watch it. We just posted the YouTube of the city council meeting, and it's just really strange because it really came out of nowhere. Nobody knew about it except for the city council and PS Resorts, which is the entity that bought the statue.
Okay. How does a group just go buy a statue? Do they pay cash for it, or how do they do it?
Well, we know that it cost $1 million. And there is some language in the contract between the Palm Springs City Council and PS Resorts that leads us to believe that they took out a loan for the statue.
Yeah.
But I'm not positive of that. Maybe they bought her outright, but there's just some references to, certain dates starting contingent upon whenever they get the loan.
Okay. So there's a bank involved in this somewhere.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, I have to ask, because you're a famous designer, is there going to be a Crema line of products that we can buy to support this effort? Like, some Crema T-shirts or anything?
I don't know that we have the timeline to actually make product. Right now, we're working on just kind of rallying community support.
Okay.
Getting people to become aware of the whole situation through the GoFundMe page. We're trying to get citizens in Palm Springs to write to the city council and write to the Desert Sun, which is our local newspaper. So I'm hoping that it will be resolved and she will go back to her original planned place prior to us having to make T-shirts.
Yeah. Well, Trina, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for updating us on this emerging situation.
Okay. Thank you, George.
And now we return to our regular program.
Hi, I'm Lady Carnarvon. I live at Highclere Castle, which I think many of you know as Downton Abbey. And thank you for listening to US Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Remember our friends, the Classicists, the guys who want to ban modernist buildings? Well, whenever they want to troll modernism, they claim it was communist, and therefore anything any communist ever did or built must be no good for the old US of A. Since we've never known any building to determine economic policy, joining us are two people who dive deep into this concrete issue. Haruna Honcoop, director of Built to Last, Relics of Communist-Era Architecture, and Marie Kordovska, granddaughter of Věra and Vladimir Machonins, late modern architects from Czechoslovakia. Later on, we'll welcome another one of our special musical guests, Hailey Tuck, and now aspiring to be a finalist on the History Channel's long-running Alone series, here's your host, George Smart.
Thank you, Tom. Have you seen Alone on the History Channel? Here's the premise of this show. Contestants are dropped off in separate sections of a remote area, like Patagonia or northern Mongolia, far enough apart to ensure they will not contact each other. They only get to take 10 items of survival gear plus clothing and some GoPro-type cameras to document their daily activities. The contestants must find food, build shelters, and endure deep isolation, the lack of food, and psychological stress until there's only one person left. Not that the others die, they just call for a rescue with a sat phone.
Get to the chopper!
From the movie Predator, that's Tom Guiled as Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Thank you.
Thank you. The winner in Alone, like most reality shows, is the last one to remain, and they get a huge pile of cash, most recently $1 million. Contestants are warned that the show might last for up to a year. It's a commitment.
Wow.
And I've been thinking about entering. And who needs 10 items? Please, I can make it with 5. After they drop me on the island or the desert or wherever, I'll set up a butterfly chair, item 1, martini glass, item 2, vodka, item 3, orange juice, item 4, and lastly, a camera. 30 minutes should do it, just enough time to take a few photos, and I'm out. It's like Kramer's early departure in Seinfeld's famous episode, The Contest, one of the most brilliant TV scripts ever filmed, which is on YouTube. You have to know, for me, that going camping is the Hyatt Regency without HBO, and going extreme camping is the Motel 6.
Oh, dear.
I'm a seasoned survivalist which means I can order pizza with my bare hands if room service is not available. So my hat's off to the very brave and resourceful men and women who stay out there on alone, hunting, fishing, and just trying to stay alive for 60, 100 more days. They know how to endure, how to last, how to combine with nature, just like modernism.
Way to go.
Support for U.S. Modernist Radio comes from Wendy Robineau and Don Beskind.
And our first guest, Haruna Honcoop, is a Czech-Japanese documentary filmmaker and video artist focusing on architecture and urbanism. Her debut documentary was called Built to Last, Relics of Communist-Era Architecture, which was filmed in 11 post-communist countries in Eastern Europe. She's currently working on the film Olympic Halftime, researching upcoming Olympic cities. Tokyo this year, they hope, Beijing 2022, and Paris 2024, and how those cities are dealing with the Olympic legacy of architecture. Welcome, Haruna.
Thank you for your introduction. Hi to everyone.
Marie Kordovska is an art theory graduate and co-founder of the nonprofit Respect Madam, promoting respectful treatment of post-war architecture. She's the granddaughter of Věra and Vladimir Machonins, late modern architects from Czechoslovakia, where she works to keep their legacy alive today. She campaigns for better understanding of her grandparents' work and is especially active in saving Hotel Thermal in Karlovy Vary from an unfortunate reconstruction. Welcome, Marie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Where is Karlovy Vary?
It's about an hour and a half to the west from Prague. It's a small spa town. It used to be very popular since the 19th century for spa treatments.
Now, Haruna, you told us as we were hooking up here, you're on a boat right now?
Yes, I'm based on a boat in Prague on the Vltava River and not far from the center. So it's a bit shaky, although there's lots of snow today. So yeah, here we go.
That's living the life on a houseboat in Prague.
Yeah.
Are you able to stay warm?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a fireplace, so I'm feeding it with wooden briquettes. So yeah.
What every boat needs, a fireplace.
Right.
Yes.
Now, is the houseboat your home?
Yes, my home and my studio where I edit my films and I do screenings of films, and yeah, it's where I do stuff.
Is there a big houseboating community are you in a neighborhood of houseboats?
Yeah. There are actually some artists, filmmakers, and just people who love water living around. So I'm definitely not alone here.
Now, Marie and Haruna, both of you, I know this is a stupid question, as Europe is a big place, but have the two of you met before?
Actually, I know about Marie because Prague is really small city. It's only 1 million people living here. I saw her when she had a talk about architecture after a film, The Palace of People, which was screened in Prague the other day, last year. So I met her there, but I don't know if she remembers me.
Marie?
I think I've seen Haruna's film, and we've been actually on several lectures together, because not only Prague has only 1 million people, but people interested in architecture, there's 70 of them, or maybe even less. So we definitely do know each other, but we haven't had the chance to grab a beer and actually say hi.
Well, I hope that you'll do that now that you've had this chat.
Well, I mean, the quarantine has to end, but soon enough.
Marie, tell us about your grandparents. And I know that you've said in other interviews you grew up in a mini kotva. What is that?
Yes. That's a very kind of an inside baseball joke that Prague people will understand. But my grandfather, he died in 1990, so I've never actually met him. And my grandmother is still alive and well. I'm actually going to be seeing her in 2 days. I'm going to have the tests done to make sure that she's fine, and I'm going to see her. They were quite prominent architects in Czechoslovakia during the 60s, which is the 60s is a key era in Czechoslovakia history because it was within the communist regime. It was a bit more free You might have heard of Prague Spring.
Yes,
And
1968.
all of that. Yeah, so up until 1968, the 60s were kind of freer. And my grandparents got the chance to win a lot of architecture competitions at that time, which allowed them to finish the projects throughout the 70s and 80s. And Kotva is this huge shopping mall in the center of Prague. And as you might know, the center of Prague is quite historic, very Baroque and classical and Gothic and all of that. And my grandparents, they built this late modern structure in the middle of this area. So it's a very well-known building. Mostly people hate it. A lot of them are beginning to like it. A lot of them absolutely adore it. And my grandparents, they built themselves a family home, which is very similar to this Kotva building. And I grew up there. Therefore, my friends, they used to call it a mini Kotva.
A mini Kotva, yeah.
Yeah.
Why do the haters hate it?
Oh, there's so many reasons. And it's not a very black and white situation. A lot of it has to do with the time that it's been constructed in. It has to do with people absolutely hating the communist regime, rightfully so.
So the symbolism.
Yes. And it's quite difficult to explain. It was built during the communist regime, but, the 60s were kind of a different time, and it was possible to build something Western-like and basically anti-communist. So it's kind of difficult to say that it's a communist building. So it's a lot of explaining to do regarding a building built during the communist era. So that's one main reason. People don't like the building.
But some people do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
A lot of them do. But
a lot of
it's
them.
Still a minority.
Yeah. For example, I do.
The second reason, just to be very brief about it, is, as I mentioned earlier, it's built in the historical city center. So Czechs aren't very good with kind of accepting the contrast. And
like Americans.
Yeah. So that just shortens it. They just don't like, they call it a monstrosity and in the middle of the picturesque city center. So that's the second main issue.
Now, Haruna, you traveled around Europe photographing buildings for your film, Built to Last. Where did you travel?
Actually, I traveled many ex-communist countries, and I was focusing on like the 1945 till 1989 architecture. Of course, I included ex-Czechoslovakia as well. And I filmed the Hotel Thermal and Kotva building, the shopping mall of Marie's grandparents. I captured them in my film as well, among others. But besides that, I travel to Moscow, where everyone got inspired at the first place. I traveled to Berlin, Warsaw, Budapest, Bucharest, Belgrade, Pristina, Tirana, and Sofia. Wow. So all the capital cities of the Eastern Bloc. And it was like a 4-year journey. I worked on that film quite slow, always when I had little bit of time to travel, which was possible back then. Now, of course, it's much more challenging to make movies abroad because of the pandemic. And it was a super interesting experience because I could meet and talk to local architects and urbanists who were in every country sort of my guides. And I made a lot of research. I digged into film archives, photographic archives, where I spent like 2 months digging into them in Budapest. So yeah, it was a long journey. And at the end, after 4 years, only 1 hour film was done, which then traveled to various festivals around the world. And it got quite a good feedback, and it opened up some discussion, what Marie mentioned before, that it's very difficult to accept this architecture because people are still very narrow-minded and they label everything which was built during communism as something which is not good, that we should demolish and build some new buildings instead of them. But of course, it's not so easy to talk about it because I was covering like this quite a long period, like the 50 years of the architecture development at the time. So of course, like you start with this socialist kind of architecture, then what Marie was mentioning, the 60s, this very like modern architecture, and then it evolved even more into like very, very modernist and this brutalist architecture. So it's not so black and white, and we can't just say it's all like this communist dark and ugly architecture, because that's not true.
So, Marie, how do you help people separate architecture from communism when thinking about these buildings?
Well, I mean, it's been a learning curve. I have to admit that, because we started our project kind of spontaneously. And what we learned very quickly is when you're born after the revolution and you try to tell people that buildings built before the revolutions are fine, it doesn't go well with a lot of them.
And when you say the revolution, are you talking about in 1989 or 1917?
Sorry.
Okay.
So 1989 is when the communist era in Czechoslovakia, or well, basically in the whole of the East, came down. And I'm born in 92.
Okay.
So to the generation of my parents and people a little bit younger than them, I'm this, spoiled post-revolution brat that never lived through communism.
We call those millennials over here.
Yeah, yeah. For a lot of people, they thought I didn't know what I was talking about. And I did have to do a lot of studying. However, what I've learned is that to explain the buildings to the general public, I need to use the story of my grandparents, which is more personal and kind of more relatable. And it's easier to kind of get my point across through that story rather than, explaining how they were, influenced by Western architecture in the 60s and how that was politically possible. That's too complicated. So I use my grandparents' story to do that.
Haruna, since we're a podcast, we can't show slides of the buildings, but tell us about some of the more spectacular buildings that you found making your film.
Well, there are just so many of them, but to start with, the whole project started in Bucharest. Like, that's where I traveled for the first time, and I was just amazed by the Ceausescu Palace, which is, after Pentagon, it's the biggest administrative building in the world.
Wow.
And it's just mind-blowing in a way. It's monstrous. It's spectacular. Ceausescu was the communist leader in Romania, which was executed in December 1989, and also his wife. I mean, the building as such it's not like modernist architecture. It's built in a very classical style. And when you enter, you see like you're in a monstrous golden palace with millions of rooms and corridors. So I was then like starting to research what the heck was going on in Romania. Like, how is it possible that this poor country was able to build such a building? And of course, it was like back then it was crazy time because Romania was so poor. The leader, Ceausescu, he demolished old villages and he was building like all across country block houses. And when you travel around Romania now, so you see these same looking block of houses everywhere instead of the picturesque villages which were there. So it's not to adore the style or the regime that he brought, but it shows the site that everyone imagine when we talk about the communist era architecture. But then when I travel furthermore, I've seen amazing buildings such as in Kosovo, in Pristina, the National Library. It's a super modern, brutalist kind of library with a very special design. In Bulgaria, the ex-communist headquarters, which was built a 1-hour drive from Sofia, called Buzluja, which kind of became the main theme for my film, but also it became this kind of pilgrimage point for many people who are interested in this architecture from this era.
Is this the building that has the tower and the saucer-shaped building in Bulgaria?
It's this kind of UFO-shaped building built in the middle of mountains, in middle of nowhere.
And it's abandoned.
And it's abandoned. And now they are discussing what they're going to do with this building. So there are a couple of plans, such as like a luxurious hotel or Museum of Communism or some casino. Like that was like a few years ago when I was there. They were...
It would make a great casino.
Yeah.
Which is not exactly what the original builders intended.
No.
Marie, where does the name of your nonprofit, Respect Madam, come from?
So as I mentioned earlier, it's only my grandmother that's still alive. And I started the nonprofit with my older brother. And throughout the years, also my younger brother joined in. It's a very much family business, or project rather. It's not a business. We very spontaneously reacted to some political issues that were going on with Hotel Thermal, the building that we're mainly focusing on. I don't really want to bore you with the details, but basically the hotel is owned by the state, and the state is currently run by a very populist government. So as you can imagine from your own experience, they don't do the best decisions, especially regarding post-war architecture. That's not really their area of expertise. So they made some terrible decisions. They were talking about tearing down a part of the building or maybe selling it off, making it into a casino. That's why it really made me laugh when Haruna was talking about that casino. It really proves that the governments, they really don't know what to do with those buildings.
We used to have a casino operator as our president.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
We sure did.
So maybe it's a trend.
I hope not.
So we reacted to this situation, and basically what we were trying to put across is to say, look, respect my grandmother's work.
But that came from a specific event involving spray paint, didn't it?
Yes. So the building where I grew up, the mini Kotwa we were talking about earlier, among architecture enthusiasts, it's a rather well-known building because it's covered in this mystery. My grandmother, she's very private. She never allowed anyone to, take pictures of the building or kind of see it inside. So very often, growing up in this building, there would be people kind of peeking across the wall and the fence. And it took me a while to realize that it's architecture enthusiasts and not, crazy people trying to burglar us.
There is a difference, yes.
Yes, but it took me a couple of years to figure that out. And one day, there was a spray painted stencil, like a graffiti, on the wall next to the entrance to the garden, which surrounds the building, that showed Hotel Thermal, and it said, "Respect Madame." And we blatantly stole that and used it as our name. And what I like about it the most is up until that point, my grandmother was very diligent with removing graffitis from that particular wall. And since then, she just let it be because she saw that then in her 80s that it's some sort of an art form as well, graffiti. And
she saw some graffiti.
Yes.
She saw some that she liked.
Yeah. I mean, it did show her building, and it's a nice graffiti as well.
That's cool.
Now, Marie, did your grandmother continue her architecture career after your grandfather died?
No, I mean, not really. It has to do with the change of the regimes. So the 90s, which is the first decade after the revolution when communism fell apart, was an era when basically everyone said everything that happened before the revolution was 100% wrong.
Was bad,
and now
yeah.
everything that we do now is 100% right. So not only my grandmother's partner in crime and in everything died in the first month of democracy, so she stayed alone for the studio, but also she wasn't accepted by the new generations immediately because they considered her a communist architect, which is kind of paradoxical because after the Russian invasion of 1968, she wasn't allowed to make buildings. So she was forbidden from working during communism, and then, to an extent, and then she was considered a communist architect for quite a while and wasn't really given a chance to build more buildings. And it's only now in the past, I would say 10 years, that people have stopped looking at the communist era in such black and white manner. And they're kind of more capable of seeing the nuances that, of course, happened during the era.
Now, Haruna, you have a sequel to Built to Last, Built to Last Beijing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what was that all like?
The story goes that I spent some time in China, which was after the release of this film. And I just decided, because I was in Beijing, and of course, it's all communist architecture there, because the old hutungs and all of that's smashed already. Like the Mao Zedong built Beijing from scratch from the 1950s. So it's all there, basically. And it's so interesting to see in China how they took the Russian style, but they are mixing it with the Chinese pagoda and, the old Chinese architecture style. So it's kind of weird mixture, see these communist style buildings mixed with Chinese characters. But as well, it has very characteristic statues and paintings and mosaics, which we are used to see in Eastern Europe. So it was quite inspiring as well, like to get to see how Asians took their inspiration from Russia and how they made it into their own quite specific style. But of course, because China is still a communist country, we can't really talk about modernist architecture there. It's just not there at all.
Let me ask you a question to each of you as we wrap up. In America, we think of communist modern architecture as being very bland and very gray. Is that actually true? Or is it better or worse or more or less functional than some of the buildings that you've seen here in America?
There's two things I would like to add to that. The first one being the topic of what we've kind of been mentioning throughout the whole interview, and that is that the term communist architecture is really quite nonsensical, or rather, it's very broad. And it's kind of saying Americans are voting for Trump, full stop.
Right. Or to say that there is capitalist architecture.
Yes. So there's a lot of differences between each countries and between each kind of historical areas and, decades, et cetera, et cetera. Because I know there's this trend of looking at communist architecture and kind of generalizing it and making it about, communist bus stops and things like that. And if I'm to be completely honest, it's kind of infuriating for me when I observe it, how, the Americans tend to talk about communist architecture because it's very generalizing and it doesn't make the architecture look very good, if I make it very blunt.
That's okay. I think that's a good point.
On the other hand, I completely understand it's very difficult to kind of get yourself oriented within the different histories and eras. So it's completely understandable that this happens. When I was thinking about what I want to say in this interview, this was the one thing that I wanted to really make stand out, that there's so much history within those years of the communist regime that it's just impossible to kind of generalize it into communist architecture. In regards to that, what I feel my grandparents' architecture is very much inspired by the West and by Le Corbusier and Alvar Aalto and, all the brilliant modernist architects. And lastly, it was one of the most, my grandparents' work at least, but generally communist architecture, I think, is one of the most colorful architecture there is, especially in the 20th century. The way they worked with color was, in my opinion, so brave. They used color in places where you wouldn't expect it, such as window frames. For example, my grandma, she put red window frames everywhere. And it's actually became a bit of a problem, for example, in our family house, because it was this very specific shade of red that was made during the 60s, and now it's basically impossible to mix it. So whenever we need to fix anything on the window frames, we really need to dig deep into, the color, the paint industry to find the exact shade that we need. And she just used so much color, and I think it was the case for most of the architecture at the time. They were just very brave with materials and colors, and definitely not kind of gray and blunt and huge.
Now, Haruna, what do you see as the major differences between American modernism and Eastern European modernism?
Yeah, I want to add something. Imagine Czechoslovakia was a locked country. So in my point of view, these guys, these architects were so brave and so skilled that they were actually able, with lack of material, to sort of improvise and build something modern. This is something that we shouldn't forget, that the material that they could use at the time was not as good as in the West, and they were very often improvising as well, and they used glass in a very original way later on, for example, in the 1980s. So, as Marie said, for me as well, it's not totally gray architecture. Also, because at that time, the government also was supporting to include sculptures in the public space. So we have quite a lot of art pieces still existing up until today, which is not the case of the 21st century, that the government would support to make the public space look nicer with some art pieces. So, of course, comparing it to the US, it's almost impossible because you guys, you were free. You had, in the US, you could get the materials to build buildings properly.
Right. Not just budgets, but access to building materials and technology.
Yeah, exactly. All the technology, and no one would judge you if you were building in a modern style, which was totally not the case in this part of the world.
May I just add one thing? It's a bit of a thing we started doing with my brother, because we found out that it's very difficult to kind of make the architecture remain in a good state. It's difficult. I mean, people usually have different plans, whether they make it into casinos, and we really are not in a position to save the buildings, turns out. However, we've decided a way how to preserve the idea is to get people's memories about buildings like that. And what I think would be extremely interesting is if Americans came to Czechoslovakia or Eastern Europe and saw these buildings, I would be really glad to hear what they thought with their perspective, which is completely different to ours, obviously. And also, if they specifically have been to Hotel Termal in Karlovy Vary, that would be absolutely amazing to hear what they think about that, because it's a center of a big film festival. So there's a big chance that someone might have been there. That would be great to hear their memories of that.
Just one last question for Marie. Surely, by now, you printed up some Respect Madam t-shirts, right?
We printed some at the very beginning, and we haven't since. But we have a lot of plans. We're just kind of making them happen as we go. We do everything out of our pocket and in our spare time after work. So we move slowly.
Well, if you make one, please let me know so I can order one. Haruna, do you have a website people can reach you?
I have a Vimeo account where people can watch my other films about architecture. So, yeah.
Okay. And that is?
It's vimeo.com/my name, Haruna Honcoop.
And Marie, what is your website?
Well, the website is respectmadame.cz, but we're the most active on Facebook, which is Respect Madame. Unfortunately, everything's in Czech, but we're happy to provide translations and explanations in English to anyone who's interested. And there's a lot of pictures.
Okay. And spell respect for our American audience.
Oh, yes. It's the Czech spelling. It's RESPEKT.
KT.
Okay. And when you say CZ, for
That's
Americans,
CZ.
that's CZ.
Yes.
Yes.
So
They teach us British English here.
yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's fine.
So respectmadam.cz will get you to Marie's site. Thank you both. This has been great.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thanks for having us.
Hailey Tuck is a jazz singer from Austin, Texas. She's been referred to as this generation's Louise Brooks, which is really 2 generations ago or so, and her bio reads like it came from a novel in a left bank bookstall in Paris. Indeed, at 18, she left her Texas Baptist military boarding school for Paris. That must have been quite an escape move. She spent her days in vintage clothing markets and nights singing in jazz bars. A chance encounter with an Italian countess at 18 led her to singing in palazzos in Venice, late-night costume parties, we're told occasionally scantily clad, and of course underground cabaret venues. Her debut album, Junk, was released in 2018. Her new self-produced EP, Coquette, will be released in March 2021 and explores work, mental health, and the unromantic nuts and bolts duties of life we all face. Containing both originals and covers, it touches on both her love of the darker side of jazz, accents of dreamy folk pop, while maintaining her playful personality. Welcome, Hailey.
Thank you.
So what exactly is a Baptist military boarding school? I mean, do they pray with guns? How does it work?
Oh my gosh, I'll tell you what, it's the biggest, greatest scam in all of history is what it is, because my dad went to this school. And back when he went, it was, a real honor in blue-collar Texas to go. And so he wanted to con me into going because I would make lifelong friends, allegedly, blah, 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 whatever. And so he told me that it was going to be like Hogwarts.
Oh, my God.
Okay.
Let me tell you, it is nothing like Hogwarts. I mean, except for a whole lot of talk about maybe dark magic and Satan. But
yeah,
it is, it's intense. They called me Private Benjamin, which was this movie with Goldie Hawn where she goes to the army.
Right.
And it was, I guess, interesting. It was like a really interesting experience. And I would have hated high school anyway. Like the other day, I was babysitting for my sister, and she has all my books, and I found my high school diary from boarding school, and it's saying, must I die so young to go under the cold, wormy ground, so I was doing quite a lot of reading at that point.
And writing.
And writing, clearly, and saying, I'm going to go to Paris one day and leave all this behind, and so, it was good for that, and it certainly worked. It propelled me forward.
And you did. You made it happen.
Did you graduate?
I did make it happen. I did graduate by the skin of my teeth. I graduated, and then went to Paris.
And I bet it was like the next day. You got your diploma and you went to the airport. Is that how it went?
Oh, yeah. Practically. I had actually crazily been in a burn accident when I was younger, and so I had this trust fund is a strong word, but I had this like insurance payout that crazily became mine at 18. And it was in installments that was supposed to be used for college. But obviously I was like, school of hard knocks, here we come. So I could use it how I wanted. So I was able to kind of immediately take myself to Paris. And I lived in this like crazy squat, and I didn't know what a squat was at the time.
What is a squat?
A squat is when like the laws in Europe allow for taking over property, I guess because people have been in property for so much longer, so there's kind of lax laws. Like you can go into a building. For example, my building was a really gorgeous ancient bank in Paris, and anarchists and different people had kind of just gone in there. Somebody had left the lights on too long, and anarchists came in and just took it over, and just as long as somebody's in there 24/7, nobody can take you out.
Well, we're talking about, say, an abandoned building. And
well, it's not abandoned, not in any way. In fact, it's
by
just
the bank.
Maybe it's for sale, or maybe they're going to renovate it, or maybe they're doing something else with it.
It's still owned.
It's empty. Definitely still owned. And they take it over. And if they stay in there long enough, the government will either rehouse them into like really cool, different housing, or they just stay in there for a really long time. So it is a pretty common practice in Europe. But I had no idea what that meant, so I was pretty scared to arrive in a squat. I was like, what do you mean I can't come in if the police are outside?
How's your French?
Très bien.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
It's pretty good. I've had a lot of time to practice, a lot of champagne to practice with,
so
a lot of French guys to practice with.
How long did you stay in Paris?
I mean, I still honestly live part of the time in Paris. I stayed in Paris for a couple of years, like right off the bat, and then I actually moved home. I came crawling back when I ran out of money for a couple of years, and then I just kind of missed it. I came here to kind of cut my teeth a bit more and just do like more of like the miserable seafood restaurant gigs, date the jazz piano player twice my age, blah, blah, blah sort of game. And then I just really wanted to move back. And then I moved back and kind of lived between London and Paris, and now I live between Portugal and Paris and tour mostly for a living.
Well, these all need to be elements in the movie about your life, because this is a great biopic already.
Oh,
How old are you now?
I am about to be 31 in April.
Yeah. I mean, this is great material for the movie. It really is.
And an Italian countess and
yes.
Scantily clad costume parties. And yeah.
Oh, I know. God, if you could see me now, how the mighty have fallen. I'm sitting here in like crusty pajamas with my you could fry an egg in my hair. I've been watching like trash TV. Ugh.
This first song is called Where Do You Go, which opens with a reference to Marlene Dietrich. Tell us about the song.
Yes. Well, actually, it is a cover song that is weirdly like not that well known, or maybe it was just kind of like cheesy. It was kind of this guy trying to, I don't know whether he was trying to be French or trying to, I don't know, appeal to the French. His name is like Peter Sarsted, singer-songwriter guy. But the lyrics I thought were just like so apropos to my life. It sounds like it's written about me. You talk like Marlene Dietrich, you dance like Zizi Jomer. My clothes are definitely not made by Balmain, but it's kind of about like just this girl who is trying to project this really beautiful kind of important, cool, wild lifestyle, but on the inside, she's just this kind of regular girl from the middle of nowhere. I certainly don't think I'm projecting nearly as cool or as amazing as the girl in this song, but I certainly.
Why don't we listen to it and then decide how you did?
Okay,
Here's Hailey Tuck with Where Do You Go?
Like Marlene Dietrich, and you dance like Zizi Jomer. Your clothes are all made by Balmain, and there's diamonds and pearls in your hair. You live in a fancy apartment off the boulevard Saint Michel, where you keep Rolling Stones records and a friend of Sasha Distel. But where do you go to, my lovely, when you're alone in your bed? Tell me the thoughts that surround you. I want to look inside your head. I've seen all your qualifications you got from the Sorbonne, and the painting you stole from Picasso. Your loveliness goes on and on. When you go on your summer vacation, you go to Juan-le-Pin with your carefully designed topless swimsuit. You get an even suntan on your back and on your legs. When the snowfalls are in Samarits with the others of the jet set, and you sip your Napoleon brandy, but you never get your lips wet. No, you don't. Where do you go to, my lovely, when you're alone in your bed? Tell me the thoughts that surround you. I want to look inside your head. Your name is heard in high places. You know the Aga Khan. He sent you a racehorse for Christmas, and you keep it just for fun, for a laugh. They say that when you get married, it'll be to a millionaire, but they don't realize where you came from. I wonder if they really care or give a damn. I know where you go to, my lovely, when you're alone in your bed. I know the thoughts that surround you, 'cause I can look inside your head.
Hailey, I love the glamorous detail in the song.
Oh, thank you. I actually produced this record with my band, so I appreciate all these any compliments on it, like so much more than I do other ones.
It was very well produced.
Yes. So let's
thank you. Oh gosh.
Let's go back to our movie storyline. So you are 18. You've just moved to Paris. You're at a house that turns out to be owned by a countess, and you tell her you want to be a jazz singer. Then what happens?
It's actually funnier than that. So I had met a different kind of vintagey girl on a bus. She complimented me on my vintage dress, and I was like, how did you know I spoke English? And she was like, no, I don't. I just speak to everybody in English. And she's just this really funny character named Erin Mahoney. Anyway, so Miss Behaven is her burlesque name, and she invites me out to dinner, and she is house sitting for this girl. And I am kind of tired of my squat life, as you might imagine. And she's like, well, you can come stay at this house that I'm house sitting at. So she's throwing a party at this house, and knowing Sorrel, as I do now, the countess in question, she would not like a party being thrown at her house when she's not there. She likes to be the thrower of parties, but she can be very funny about things like that. And so she comes home from vacation, like exhausted, and our friend is throwing a party in her house. And so she's like, oh, God, fine, screw it. I just have to do this now. So then she, even worse than that, sits down on her velvet couch And she's like, hi, whatever. Who are you? And I'm like, hi, whatever. Come here often. She's like, I live here. This is my house. And I was like, ooh, bad news. I live at your house. She's like, where? I'm like, right here on this couch. And she's like, oh my God. Tell me about you. What do you do? And I was like, no, I'm 18. I just moved to Paris. I want to be a jazz singer. And she's like, okay, well then I'm going to put you in a costume and I want you to get up on this table and sing. And if I like your singing, you get to keep living on my couch.
Ooh.
And so she puts me in this beautiful, like half-naked Art Deco costume. And back then I had the body for it. And sticks me on her table. And I sung her, I'll Be Seeing You, a la Billie Holiday. And she was like, that was beautiful. The couch is yours. And I still, to this day, many, many times have slept in the painting studio or her couch. She's still one of my best friends and greatest supporters. She's took me to Venice Carnival and it's just like she introduced me around so many times. And I think I credit her so much with my life and career because she took what I already had, which was I loved vintage clothes and I loved like this time period and I wanted to be something, but she actually already was all those things. She's American, but she married an Italian count and they're both really amazing artists in their own right. And she just said like, yeah, you can do this. This is actually an option. People do this all the time. Just move to Europe and make it happen. We have friends that are corset makers and miniature portrait painters. And like, if you want to be a jazz singer, that's an easy one. So don't be afraid of it.
So is Meryl Streep going to play her in the movie, Hailey?
Yes, actually, she should play herself in the movie, to be honest.
Okay.
She sounds like a character.
Oh, yes.
As do you. Yeah. You never know where life is going to lead you, huh?
You don't. You really, really don't. It's so interesting. I wanted to go to Juilliard, and I wanted to be an actress. My older sister, who's prettier than me and more on time and just like everything more than me and dates like famous people. I wanted to be her. And I never would have, I kind of like managed to have, she lives in LA and like has this cool life. And like, I managed to carve out my own life. And, that's poetic and cool.
It is. Now, this next song's lyrics were written by Bob Dylan in 1962. When Palm Springs was at its height of mid-century modern jazz, drawing mostly from the 40s, the new and exciting folk movement was taking off back east, and Bob Dylan was right at its center. Some tight-lipped moralists decried the lyrics of this song for sexual content, as the song implied people were actually having sex, as they might say, without the benefit of marriage. The music is from the public domain song, Who's Gonna Buy Your Chickens When I'm Gone? And the song was used on Mad Men, Friday Night Lights, This Is Us, and Men of a Certain Age, plus movies Dogfight and The Help. Part of innumerable Dylan albums and collections, it's been covered by a huge diversity of performers, including Willie Nelson, Glenn Campbell, Dolly Parton, Trini Lopez, who we lost just last year, Bobby Darin, Cher, Jerry Reed, Joan Baez, the Allman Brothers, my favorite lounge singer, Vonda Shepard, Arlo Guthrie, and other one-name performers like Elvis, Melanie, and Keisha. The Four Seasons released a cover as a single in 1965 with a fake name, The Wonder Who, which reached number 12 on Billboard's Top 100 and sold 1 million copies as a fake group. Anyway, the widest acclaim, however, came for folk trio Peter, Paul, and Mary. Until today, here's Hailey Tuck with Don't Think Twice.
It ain't no use to sit and wonder why, if you don't know by now. It ain't no use to sit and wonder why, it'll never do somehow. When your rooster crows at the break of dawn, look out your window and I'll be gone. You're the reason I'm traveling on. Don't think twice, it's alright. And it ain't no use in turning on your light, the light I never know. It ain't no use turning on your light, I'm on the dark side of the road. I wish there was something you would do or say try to make me change my mind and stay. We never did too much talking anyway. Don't think twice, it's alright. Like you've never done before. It ain't no use calling out my name. I can't hear you anymore. I'm thinking and wondering, walking down the road. I once loved a woman, a child, I'm told. Gave her my heart, but she wanted my soul. Don't think twice, it's alright. So long, honey baby. Where I'm bound, I can't tell. Goodbye's too good a word, babe. So I'll just say fare thee well. I ain't saying you treated me unkind. Could have done better, but I don't mind. Just kinda wasted my precious time. So don't think twice, it's alright. Don't think twice, it's alright.
That bawdy Bob Dylan.
Yeah, I know. I can see you now, Hailey, in an Art Deco dress singing that song on top of a table somewhere.
Oh, hopefully someday you will.
I know. We're going to have to figure out a way to get us all together.
Yes. Oh, by the way, I didn't tell you my architecture joke.
Oh, please.
This is how I pick up architects. Did you hear that Frank Lloyd Wright's kids are trying to change the name of Falling Water?
His kids are trying to change the name of Falling Water
To Rising Mold.
Oh, I get it. That's a deferred maintenance
I'll show
joke.
myself the door.
Oh, you win an A for effort, though.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That was a good one.
Well, Hailey, what's your website? How can people find out more about you and your music?
My website is HaileyTuckMusic.com. I am Hailey Tuck on Instagram.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so looking forward to finding out who else is snuggled up with me on this podcast and continuing to listen to this podcast. I want to be best friends with everybody that you guys ever choose to have on here, including you.
Be careful what you wish for, because we'll make that happen.
Ooh, yes. Okay, perfect. Have a great day, you guys.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin. Tom, get to the chopper!
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 8,000 significant modernist houses, and access 3 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino researches houses, architects, and podcast guests while juggling 2 above-average children, 12 domestic animals, and a shockingly handsome husband, Adam, who knows just how to flip her breakers. Zzz, sparks will fly. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another concrete and steel, brutally modernist edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.